The Galactic Administrative Hub existed in that special category of architectural achievement, where form had not merely followed function, it had strangled function in a back alley, and worn its identity like a poorly fitting suit, spanning 14 dimensions and requiring 17 different types of mathematics. Just to navigate the parking structure, the facility represented the collective bureaucratic genius of 47 species, who had somehow managed to make paperwork a quantum phenomenon. Most beings required specialized training just to understand which way was up in the hub's twisted corridors, where gravity operated on a committee basis, and the concept of straight lines had been voted out of existence by the Trilateral Geometric Council sometime during the previous millennium. The architecture itself seemed designed by beings who had heard rumors about buildings but had never actually seen one, resulting in corridors that occasionally led to next Tuesday and elevators that sometimes arrived before they were called, which made it all the more remarkable that humans had found their perfect niche in this monument to organized chaos: janitorial services. It turned out that when your species evolved on a planet where the weather changed its mind every 5 minutes and the local fauna considered everything either a threat to be eliminated or a snack to be consumed, you developed certain adaptive advantages. Chief among these was an uncanny ability to find order in chaos and clean up messes that defied several laws of physics. While other species brought specialized knowledge and advanced degrees, humans brought mops, determination, and an almost supernatural ability to make things work properly again. The night shift janitor, currently making her rounds through Sector 47B, had been employed at the hub for exactly 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days. Not that anyone was counting except for the 17 different payroll systems that somehow all calculated her wages differently. She had applied for the position after the previous human janitor had been promoted to Deputy Assistant Undersecretary of Interdimensional Waste Management, which was apparently a real job with real responsibilities and a surprisingly good pension plan. Her qualifications for the position were straightforward. She could operate cleaning equipment without breaking it, didn't require specialized atmospheric conditions, and most importantly possessed the fundamental human trait of being able to look at something obviously broken and think, "That's stupid," followed immediately by, "Let me fix it." The job itself was fairly routine, if you could call anything routine in a building where the bathroom facilities existed in 12 dimensions and required a PhD in theoretical physics to flush properly. Empty the trash receptacles that occasionally tried to empty themselves into parallel universes. Mop floors that sometimes decided to become walls mid-cleaning. Replace burnt-out bulbs that had been known to file formal complaints about working conditions. Tonight's route took her through the security checkpoint, a gauntlet of scanning devices that represented each member species' unique approach to identifying potential threats. The Centauri preferred retinal scans that also checked for bad poetry, while the hegemony of crystal beings insisted on molecular analysis that could detect whether someone had eaten processed food within the last decade. The result was a checkpoint that took most beings roughly 23 minutes to navigate and left them feeling like they'd been interrogated by a philosophical committee. She approached the checkpoint with the weary confidence of someone who had done this exact same thing every night for over 2 years. The scanners began their elaborate dance of identification, each species' technology humming, clicking, or in the case of the melodic collective, singing soft arias about her secular composition. The first indication that tonight might be different came when the Centauri scanner, instead of its usual polite chime indicating custodial staff authorized, began emitting a series of increasingly frantic beeps. The readout, normally a simple green proceed, flickered through several dozen languages before settling on standard Galactic with a message that made the security guard's tentacles twitch nervously. Administrator level supreme. The hegemony scanner, apparently not wanting to be outdone, immediately began projecting holographic displays showing organizational charts where her face appeared at the very top, surrounded by golden borders and what appeared to be tiny digital fanfare trumpets. The melodic collective scanner switched from its usual pleasant humming to what sounded distinctly like a coronation anthem. Within seconds, all 17 scanning systems had reached the same impossible conclusion. The human with the mop was apparently the highest-ranking administrative official in known galactic space. The security guard, a 6-armed Deltarian whose ancestors had evolved from creatures that took bureaucracy very seriously indeed, stared at the readouts with the expression of someone whose worldview had just been fed through a paper shredder. His name tag identified him as a Level 7 security technician, which meant he was qualified to handle everything from interdimensional smuggling attempts to philosophical disputes about the nature of existence, but absolutely nothing in his training had prepared him for this. There must be some mistake, he muttered, speaking more to himself than to the human standing patiently with her cleaning cart. The system says you're an administrator, level supreme, but you're holding a mop. The human glanced down at her mop as if she'd forgotten it was there, then back at the increasingly agitated displays. Yeah, that's weird, she agreed with the kind of calm that came from 2 years of dealing with malfunctioning alien technology on a nightly basis. I clean things. That's pretty much it. Maybe your scanners need cleaning too. This suggestion caused the security guard to make a sound that roughly translated to existential dread mixed with mild indigestion. The scanners were maintained by the finest technicians from across the galaxy, calibrated daily using quantum harmonics, and blessed weekly by the tech priests of the sacred algorithm. They did not need cleaning. They certainly did not malfunction 17 different ways simultaneously to produce identical impossible results. Perhaps, the guard said with the careful tone of someone trying to convince himself as much as anyone else, there has been a clerical error, or possibly cosmic interference. Solar flares can sometimes affect quantum resonance patterns in scanning matrices. He began running diagnostic routines with the desperate efficiency of someone whose entire understanding of reality was currently being questioned by a collection of very expensive machines. The scanners helpfully responded by playing what sounded like victory music while displaying increasingly elaborate administrative titles, including some positions that the guard was fairly certain didn't actually exist, such as Supreme Overlord of Paperwork Reduction and Empress of Logical Solutions. The human waited patiently, occasionally checking her watch and wondering if she'd have time to finish cleaning the executive bathrooms before her shift ended. She had learned long ago that alien technology would do whatever alien technology wanted to do, and arguing with it was about as productive as trying to explain the concept of weekends to a black hole. What she didn't know, and what the increasingly frantic security guard definitely didn't know, was that somewhere in the vast computational networks that governed galactic civilization, a very simple truth was being processed for the first time. Sometimes the most qualified person for a job was the one who had never wanted it in the first place. The security guard's diagnostic routines had achieved nothing except confirming that 17 different scanning systems were in perfect working order, and absolutely convinced that a janitor was the most powerful being in the known galaxy. After 47 minutes of increasingly creative attempts to make the machine see reason, he had finally given up and waved her through with the defeated air of someone whose job description definitely hadn't included having philosophical arguments with quantum scanners. What happened next could only be described as a cascade failure of galactic proportions, if cascade failures typically involved doors opening with reverent deference, and computer systems practically prostrating themselves in digital submission. The first door she encountered, a standard security portal that normally required level 12 clearance, and 3 different biometric confirmations, took one look at her approach and swung open with what could only be described as enthusiasm. The accompanying chime, usually a brief acknowledgement beep, had somehow transformed into a full orchestral fanfare that echoed through the corridor with enough pomp and circumstance to herald the arrival of minor deities. By the time she reached the main administrative levels, word of the scanning anomaly had spread through the facility's networks faster than gossip at a diplomatic reception. The galactic community had spent millennia perfecting their bureaucratic systems, creating layers of complexity that required advanced degrees just to understand the filing system. These weren't just computers. They were the technological embodiment of 47 different species' collective obsession with proper procedures, appropriate channels and forms filed in triplicate across multiple dimensions. And every single one of these systems had apparently decided that a human with a mop bucket was their supreme commander. Doors began opening before she reached them. Elevators arrived at her floor without being called, their speakers playing what sounded suspiciously like triumphant arrival music. Computer terminals lit up as she passed, displaying messages in languages she couldn't read but which all seemed to involve a lot of exclamation points and celebratory symbols. The other night shift workers, a collection of beings from various species who had drawn the short straw in the employment lottery, began treating her with the kind of nervous deference typically reserved for beings who could sign execution orders or cancel entire pension plans with a casual gesture. A hegemony filing clerk who had never acknowledged her existence in 2 years suddenly bowed so low his crystalline structure nearly scraped the floor. Two Deltarian accountants stopped their conversation mid-sentence to step aside and nod respectfully as she passed with her car. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on her. She was still wearing the same utilitarian jumpsuit she'd worn every night for over 2 years, still pushing the same squeaky-wheeled cart loaded with cleaning supplies that had seen better decades. The only thing that had changed was that apparently every piece of technology in the facility had collectively lost its artificial mind. Her route that night included the executive conference room on level 847X, a space so important that it existed in its own pocket dimension to prevent eavesdropping and required special clearance just to clean the window. The room was typically empty during night shifts, which made it perfect for the kind of thorough cleaning that involved getting into corners that technically existed in Next Thursday. Except tonight the conference room wasn't empty. The door had opened for her before she could even reach for her cleaning access card, which, given that she didn't have one for this particular room, was probably for the best. Inside, arranged around a table that could have comfortably seated a small army, was what appeared to be an emergency session of the Galactic Administrative Council. 47 beings from across known space sat in various states of what could generously be called controlled panic. Some were pacing, which was impressive considering that several of them lacked traditional legs. Others were engaged in animated discussions in 17 different languages simultaneously, creating a cacophony that sounded like a diplomatic crisis being filtered through a broken universal translator. At the head of the table, projected on screens the size of small moons, were charts, graphs, and data streams that painted a picture of galactic civilization slowly strangling itself in its own bureaucratic complexity. Trade routes were backing up because cargo manifests required approval from committees that required approval from other committees. Entire star systems were filing for bankruptcy because their tax forms had been lost in interdimensional filing cabinets. The hegemony of crystal beings hadn't spoken to the Deltarian Empire in 6 months because neither side could agree on the proper protocol for scheduling a meeting to discuss scheduling future meetings. The humans stood in the doorway, mop in hand, taking in the scene with the detached interest of someone who had seen alien leadership in crisis before, and found it remarkably similar to watching her neighbors argue about whose turn it was to take out the garbage. One of the Zentari representatives noticed her first, his multiple eyes widening in recognition or possibly terror. "The administrator," he whispered, and the room fell silent with the kind of abrupt completeness that suggested everyone present had heard rumors about scanning anomalies and mysterious humans. "Sorry," she said, raising her mop apologetically. "I just need to clean the windows. Don't mind me." But as she moved toward the nearest window, her eyes inevitably drifted to the massive displays showing the galaxy's problems in all their overwhelming complexity. Trade bottlenecks, communication failures, bureaucratic gridlock. It was all there in glorious, colorful detail. She said absently, spraying cleaning solution on a window that probably cost more than most planets' annual budgets. If you just eliminated the Department of Redundant Departmental Redundancy and merged it with the Office of Administrative, you could probably cut processing time in half. The silence that followed could have been bottled and sold as a meditation aid. A hegemony representative, whose crystalline structure was literally vibrating with stress, spoke first. That department was established by the Treaty of Essential Bureaucratic Necessities. It would require approval from 47 different oversight committees to even consider such a change. Or the human continued, now working on a particularly stubborn spot that might have been either a water stain or a small dimensional anomaly. You could just dissolve those committees, since they spend most of their time forming subcommittees to discuss forming other subcommittees. Seems like a lot of extra steps. The room erupted in a chaos of translated exclamations, the kind of multilingual pandemonium that occurred when beings whose ancestors had been perfecting bureaucracy for millennia suddenly heard someone suggest that maybe, just maybe, they were overthinking things. What they didn't realize, what none of them could realize, because it required a perspective that could only come from a species that had learned to adapt or die on a daily basis, was that they were witnessing something that hadn't been seen in galactic politics for over 1,000 years. Common sense applied to complex problems. As she finished cleaning the windows and headed for the door, the room behind her buzzed with the kind of excited energy that accompanied genuine breakthrough. For the first time in decades, beings from across the galaxy were agreeing on something. Maybe the scanning systems hadn't malfunctioned after all. Word traveled fast in a facility designed by beings who had turned information sharing into an art form, requiring 17 different types of authentication. By the time the human finished her rounds on level, her casual observations about bureaucratic streamlining had been translated into 47 languages, analyzed by 12 different think tanks, and somehow resulted in 3 separate species filing formal requests to hire her as a consultant. The cosmic joke was beginning to reveal itself, though none of the participants quite understood the punchline yet. The Deltarian Empire's representative had spent 6 hours running probability calculations on her suggestions, only to discover that implementing them would reduce their administrative overhead by roughly 87% while increasing efficiency by margins that their computers kept insisting were mathematically impossible. The hegemony of crystal beings had convened an emergency session of their High Council of Logical Procedure, where ancient artificial intelligences that had been optimizing bureaucratic processes for millennia found themselves genuinely excited about paperwork for the first time in their electronic existence. By morning, the human had accidentally solved 17 major galactic crises, simply by applying what she considered basic common sense. The trade route bottlenecks. Just tell people to pick a lane and stick with it. The diplomatic protocol crisis between the melodic collective and the silent brotherhood. Maybe try writing things down instead of assuming everyone understands interpretive dance. The complex taxation dispute that had been raging for 3 decades, flat rate, 10%, done. Next problem. Each solution was so elegantly simple that it left experienced diplomats staring at their advanced degrees in theoretical bureaucracy and wondering if they'd somehow missed the point of their entire civilization. What they couldn't understand, what their specialized evolutionary paths had made it impossible for them to understand, was that they were witnessing the practical application of humanity's greatest survival trait, adaptive generalization. While every other species in the galaxy had evolved in relatively stable environments that rewarded specialization, humans had the misfortune of developing on a planet that seemed determined to kill them in new and creative ways every few thousand years. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, meteor impacts, climate shifts that turned forests into deserts and deserts into oceans. Earth had thrown everything short of spontaneous combustion at early humanity and probably would have tried that too if given enough time. The result was a species that didn't just adapt to changing conditions. They became adaptation specialists. Where other beings developed highly refined solutions for specific problems, humans developed the ability to look at any situation and think, well, this is obviously broke, how do we fix it with what we've got? The galaxy's scanning systems, designed by beings whose idea of adaptability was choosing between 2 predetermined responses, had recognized something that even humans themselves didn't fully appreciate. They were natural administrators, not because they were good at following complex procedures, but because they were extraordinarily good at making complex procedures unnecessary. The revelation came to the human herself around 3 a.m. local station time, as she was cleaning the central data core that housed the facility's primary artificial intelligence. The AI, known formally as the Omniscient Administrative Matrix and informally as Dave by the maintenance staff, had been unusually chatty since the scanning incident. Query: individual designated as cleaning specialist. Do you possess awareness of your classification status according to Galactic Administrative Protocols? She paused in her cleaning of Dave's primary input console, which was roughly the size of a small building and considerably more complex. You mean the administrator thing? Yeah, that's been weird. I keep telling everyone I just clean stuff. Clarification: scanning protocols indicated individual possesses administrative capabilities rated at supreme level. However, individual's employment record indicates custodial functions only. Logical contradiction detected. Well, maybe your scanners are looking for the wrong thing, she suggested, attacking a particularly stubborn spot that might have been either accumulated dust or a small colony of digital parasites. I mean, what makes a good administrator anyway? Dave processed this question for approximately 0.003 seconds, which in AI terms was roughly equivalent to a human spending several years in deep philosophical contemplation. Historical analysis indicates effective administrators demonstrate following traits: ability to identify core problems, implement practical solutions, adapt to changing circumstances, and coordinate diverse groups toward common objectives. Right, so basically someone who can look at a mess and figure out how to clean it up. Affirmative. However, galactic administrative training focuses primarily on following established protocols, managing complex procedural requirements, and maintaining traditional bureaucratic structures. So you train administrators to be good at administrating administration instead of actually solving problems. Dave's processors hummed with what could charitably be called artificial contemplation, though it sounded suspiciously like electronic laughter. Analysis suggests that statement contains significant accuracy. Galactic administrative systems appear to have evolved beyond their original purpose of solving problems, instead becoming self-perpetuating structures designed primarily to maintain their own existence. The human leaned against Dave's console, considering this. That's like having a cleaning system that's so complicated it makes everything dirtier. Analogy accepted. Accuracy rating, extremely high. It was at this moment that something clicked in both the artificial and human consciousness present in the room. The scanners weren't malfunctioning. They were doing exactly what they'd been designed to do: identify beings capable of effective administration. The problem was that the galaxy's current definition of administrator had become so removed from actual administration that the systems had never encountered a real one before. "Dave," she said slowly, "what would happen if someone actually tried to run galactic administration like, actual administration?" Dave's response involved approximately 17 minutes of calculations that resulted in projections so optimistic they made his probability matrices question their own programming. Trade flowing freely, disputes resolved in hours instead of decades, resources allocated based on need rather than the ability to navigate interdimensional filing systems. It was, from a computational standpoint, beautiful. Theoretical outcome: unprecedented levels of efficiency and problem resolution. Probability of implementation: historically zero, due to resistance from established administrative hierarchies. But what if someone with supreme administrative authority implemented? Dave's circuits practically purred with electronic satisfaction. Theoretical resistance to supreme administrative authority zero. Such authority supersedes all existing protocols and procedural requirements. The human stared at the mop in her hand, then at the vast displays showing galactic civilization's problems spreading across the screens like a cosmic to-do list. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the facility humming with the kind of urgent activity that suggested important people were having important meetings about important things that would ultimately result in the formation of committees to study the feasibility of forming other committees. For the first time since the scanning incident began, she smiled. It wasn't a particularly nice smile. It was the kind of smile that belonged to someone who had just realized that the universe had handed her the keys to fix everything that had been annoying her for the past 2 years. "Dave," she said, straightening up and gripping her mop with new purpose, "I think I'm going to need a bigger bucket." The thing about wielding supreme administrative authority, as the human discovered over the following weeks, was that it came with all the perks of absolute power, and absolutely none of the traditional headaches. When your entire approach to leadership could be summarized as fix what's broken and ignore what isn't, most of galactic civilization turned out to be surprisingly manageable. Her first official act as the galaxy's accidental supreme administrator was to eliminate what she dubbed the stupidity cascade, the phenomenon where simple problems became complex crises, because they had to be processed through 17 different departments, each of which specialized in making things more complicated than they needed to be. The Interdimensional Trade Commission, for example, had spent 3 years debating whether quantum cargo manifests should be filed in triplicate or quadruplicate across parallel universes. Her solution: file it once. If it gets lost, file it again. If it gets lost twice, maybe don't ship through that particular dimension. This revolutionary concept, that administrative processes should actually serve their stated purpose, rather than existing as elaborate job justification programs, sent shockwaves throughout the galactic bureaucratic establishment. Entire departments discovered they could accomplish their century-old mission statements in roughly 6 hours per week, leaving them with the uncomfortable realization that they'd been creating work instead of doing work. The Deltarian Empire's Department of Circular Reference Verification, which had employed 14 million beings, whose job was to verify that verification processes were properly verified, found itself suddenly obsolete when she implemented what became known as the Trust But Verify Once protocol. The department's former employees were reassigned to actually useful positions, such as the newly created Department of Fixing Things That Are Obviously Broken. What made the entire transformation even more surreal was that she continued to carry her mop everywhere she went, not as some symbolic gesture or quirky leadership affectation, but because old habits died hard and someone still needed to clean up the messes that accumulated in a facility housing representatives from 47 different species, with 47 different ideas about proper waste disposal. The sight of the galaxy's most powerful administrator mopping floors while simultaneously dissolving unnecessary committees became the stuff of legend. Diplomatic visitors would arrive expecting elaborate ceremonies and complex protocols, only to find themselves in conversations about resource allocation, while she cleaned windows or emptied trash receptacles. The hegemony of crystal beings requires formal acknowledgement of their crystalline status in all official documentation, announced a visiting ambassador during one such encounter, reading from a prepared statement while she scrubbed what appeared to be interdimensional graffiti off a nearby wall. "Sure," she replied without looking up. "Or we could just call them the Crystal People and save everyone some typing." Does their crystalline status actually affect how we handle trade agreements? Well, no, but protocol requires. Then we'll skip the protocol and get to the actual work. This approach, treating diplomatic complexity like soap scum that needed to be scrubbed away to reveal the actual surface underneath, proved remarkably effective. Trade disputes that had festered for decades were resolved over lunch break. Territorial conflicts that required extensive mediation were settled with the kind of practical boundary solutions that would have occurred to anyone who had ever had to share space with roommates. The Melodic Collective and the Silent Brotherhood, who had been locked in a communications crisis for 6 months, because one species expressed everything through interpretive song, while the other communicated exclusively through meaningful silence, found their problem solved when she suggested they try written notes. The revolutionary concept of putting words on paper had somehow never occurred to either group's diplomatic corps, but perhaps the most significant change came when she tackled the galaxy's most persistent problem, the bureaucracy itself. During what became known as the Great Administrative Purge, she systematically eliminated every department, committee, subcommittee, and working group that couldn't explain its purpose in one sentence, using words that didn't require advanced degrees to understand. This resulted in the dissolution of approximately 78% of the galactic government, including such essential departments as the Bureau of Bureaucratic Oversight, the Committee for Committee Formation, and the Department of Departmental Department Management. The remaining 22% found themselves suddenly capable of accomplishing tasks that had previously required months of interdepartmental coordination. Problems got solved. Resources reached where they were. Communication flowed freely without requiring translation through 17 different administrative layers. Dave, the facility's AI, had taken to providing running commentary on the efficiency improvements, with the enthusiasm of a computer program that had finally found its true calling. Current administrative processing time, down 89%. Resource allocation efficiency up 412%. Interdepartmental conflict resolution, approaching theoretical maximum efficiency. "That's nice, Dave," she would reply while cleaning his increasingly cheerful displays. "How are the actual problems getting solved?" Definition of actual problems requested. You know, the stuff people actually need. Food, shelter, transportation, not getting eaten by space pirates, that sort of thing. Analysis indicates that problems categorized as stuff people actually need are being resolved at unprecedented rate. Conclusion: administrative efficiency correlates directly with practical problem resolution. Who would have thought? The irony wasn't lost on her that she had become the galaxy's most effective leader by applying the same principles she used for custodial work. Identify what needed cleaning, use the most efficient method available, and don't overthink it. The universe's most complex political entity was being successfully managed using janitor logic. 6 months after the scanning incident that had started everything, she stood in the same security checkpoint where it all began, still carrying the same mop, still wearing the same utilitarian jumpsuit. The scanners still read administrator level supreme, But now they did so with what could only be described as smugness, as if they wanted credit for recognizing obvious competence when they saw it. The security guard, the same Deltarian who had been so confused by the initial readings, nodded respectfully as she passed. His new assignment was considerably more interesting than checking identification. He now headed the Department of Obviously Necessary Security Measures, which had successfully reduced security processing time from 23 minutes to 37 seconds, while somehow increasing actual security effectiveness. "Good evening, Administrator," he said with genuine cheerfulness. "How was the fixed 3 trade disputes, dissolved 2 unnecessary departments, and got that stain out of the conference room carpet that nobody could identify," she replied, adjusting her grip on the mop handle. "Pretty standard too," as she headed home to the same modest quarters she'd occupied as a janitor. Because moving to executive housing seemed like unnecessary paperwork, she reflected on the cosmic joke that had made her the galaxy's accidental C-47 species with advanced civilizations, incredible technologies, and sophisticated cultures, had somehow managed to overlook the most basic principle of effective organization. If something is broken, fix it. If something is stupid, change it. If something is working, leave it alone. The scanners had been right from the beginning. They had recognized administrative capability when they saw it, even when it came disguised as someone whose job description involved industrial-strength cleaning supplies and a comprehensive understanding of alien bathroom facilities. The galaxy's greatest mystery hadn't been solved by advanced algorithms or diplomatic genius. It had been solved by someone who approached complex problems the same way she approached dirty floors, methodically efficient, and with the unshakable conviction that most messes were simpler to clean up than people made them out to be. And if that wasn't the most perfectly human solution to a cosmic problem, she thought with satisfaction, then the scanners really were broken.